Welcome to episode 45 of the Lowdown Show. I'm Neil Graham, and I just have to say my cat's losing his mind. So if you hear noise in the background, it'll end soon. This week, ADVrider.com's managing editor, Zac Kurylyk, tells us about hammering out the miles on 2 Chinese ADV bikes in the American Southwest, and about 2 Las Vegas motorcycle shows that couldn't be more different. But first, a word from our sponsor. Picture this. You're halfway through a DIY motorcycle fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. Don't fret. It's okay, because you know, whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got simply everything. Brake rotors, lights, and tire exhaust systems, whatever you need. And it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers hoping you ordered the right thing. All the parts you need at prices you'll love, guaranteed to fit every time. eBay. Things people love. Zac, you just got back from Las Vegas. Not my favorite place. Unless it's winter in Canada, then it's my favorite place. You went to 2 motorcycle shows, 2 very different motorcycle shows. Tell me about them.
I went to AIMExpo, which is an industry-only show. And I also went to the One Show, which is a enthusiast show, custom bikes, custom bike culture, motor culture, motorcycle cool kids, and their handiwork on display.
And this is brought to us by the One Moto people that we had featured on a podcast who normally do their show in Portland, correct?
Yes, that's correct. This was the first time that the One Show has run outside of Portland. They ran 15 shows in Portland, and this was the first time it's gone on the road to Las Vegas.
Which is interesting, because I didn't realize, I thought Portland people only recognized Portland. I didn't realize they recognized anything else. So that's that in itself is interesting. So take us, let's start with the AIMExpo show. What was there, and more significantly, perhaps, what wasn't there?
What was there was a lot of people trying to convince dealers to pick up their product. There wasn't a whole lot of motorcycles on display. It's not like AICMA, where the public is invited and everybody can go in and see what's new. There was some of that stuff. Right when you go in to AIMExpo at the very start, Suzuki has a big display with all their new bikes. And a few other OEMs have similar new bikes, new ATVs. But most of that is smaller brands trying to convince dealers to pick up their line. So Benelli was there, Segway was there, companies like that. But you don't see a huge display from Honda or Kawasaki. They did have some representation there, but it wasn't a big display trying to get people to pick up their line, because people already carry Honda and Kawasaki and so on.
The Lowdown Show is presented by ADVrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. Zac, we're going to back up a bit, and we're going to talk about some of the things at AIMExpo. I've got some photographs here, and I'm going to pull them up, and you're going to tell me what they are. So let's start right here. What are we looking at?
That is a 2-stroke 500 dirt bike from Thumpstar. And I think it was the coolest thing at AIMExpo. And it was also quite interesting because AIMExpo is not a place where traditionally where new motorcycles get debuted. Most of the bikes at AIMExpo have been out for months already. They debuted in September or October, November on the European show circuit. But this bike was literally just finished construction about 3 days before the show. They had ridden it, I think, once or twice on a motocross track, and that was it. So Thumpstar is best known for making Chinese-built bikes and putting Thumpstars in Australia, and they get Chinese companies to build the bikes, and then they sell them around the world. This isn't a Chinese motorcycle. That 2-stroke 500 engine is made in Calgary in Canada. It's very similar, I believe, to a CR 500 engine, but it has a counterbalancer, it has electric start, and some other improvements. And I think it's supposed to make similar power to a CR 500 as well.
Scary. Did you talk to the people who did this?
Yes, I did. I asked them, is there a market for this sort of thing? And they said, nobody's built a big bore 2-stroke for 20 years. So I guess we're going to find out if anybody will buy it.
I mean, it's not eligible. I don't know my motocross that well. Forgive me, but it's not really eligible for any pre-existing race classes, correct?
I don't think their plan is to take it anywhere close to AMA racing or anything like that. This is just for somebody who has a bunch of money. They want a brand new 2-stroke dirt bike. And the way they were talking MSRP around 10,000 US, which I thought was actually quite reasonable.
That is good.
And
yeah.
this particular bike was essentially hand built. And I think going forward, that will be how they're constructed until they can set up mass production. I don't know how many they will build in total. They said that the production final version of the machine will probably have a little tamer suspension on it. And so I doubt you would see that kind of machining on the swing arm, that kind of thing either.
Makes me think of beer cans for some reason.
Yeah.
Well, okay, let's go from the sublime to the ridiculous. What is this monstrosity? You know, I'm never going to say anything bad about a Kawasaki Vulcan again after seeing this photograph.
That is a Regal Raptor cruiser from China. As far as all the sort of unknown Chinese brands there, I've seen this before on the internet, and they did have some traffic at their booth because, you know, as unpleasant as it may look to you or me, it definitely caught some attention at the show. Whether they managed to sign up a bunch of dealers, I don't know. If they want to give me a test ride on the thing, I will happily take it for a spin and tell them what I think.
Is that a CVT transmission?
I have no idea what was in it.
Because it looks like there's a belt guard off a snowmobile on the.
Yeah, I think it is. I had a picture of the other side of it too, but I didn't stop really and talk to them because, I mean, it's a cruiser and we're, you know, adventure bike people.
All right. Well, this looks a little better. This one. What's this thing?
That's the Moto Morini Crucero GT. They released this, I think, in November in Milan, but they announced it for the US market at AIMExpo. It's kind of like an early multistrada. It's not really an adventure bike, but it's got that kind of crossover, long travel suspension, sticky rubber. I forget the size of the engine. I think it's got about 100 horsepower. I think it's an L twin, like a Ducati multistrada. It was a really interesting machine, actually. If you live in a place where that's got bumpy pavement and you want a bike that can eat that stuff up, but you're not really interested in going off-road, this might do the trick.
Now, Morini is obviously Italian, the name, but the bike is Chinese, correct?
Yes, that's right. They design their bikes in Italy and manufacture them in China. I think the parts supply is also done out of Italy. They're a very Italian company. Their manufacturing may be in China, but they were they introduced all their bikes at AIMExpo with this drum team that came out, or drum line or whatever, that came out and made a big racket. You know, you don't usually see that kind of flair at AIMExpo, but they upheld their Italian traditions and did just that.
No, I like that. Were there any trapeze artists?
There was no trapeze artist, unfortunately.
Jesus. That would have had you. And let's talk about this, back of the helmet.
Oh, yeah, that's the new Senna Phantom helmet. Yeah, those are brake lights. They function as running lights and normal riding, and then when you slow down, they activate as brake lights. It's kind of similar to the there's an aftermarket system that you can buy that I've tested before that fits on your helmet, just kind of a clamp glues on. Then you slide a light into it. I actually really like this idea. I think it's one of the smartest kind of safety features that you can add to your helmet as a motorcyclist, because if your taillight goes out or if it's just otherwise unnoticed, having some extra visibility is always a good idea. So
how does it communicate with your motorcycle? Do you know?
I suspect it's got an accelerometer in there that it's just like in your cell phone. It can sense a change in direction and it just lights up when you're slowing down.
So it doesn't have to be paired with the motorcycle in any way.
No, it doesn't. The other one that I have, I can't remember the name of the company that makes it now, but there's no connection to your helmet. It's Brake Free Technologies is the name of the company. It just senses that you're slowing down and starts to flash. And it drives up the price of the brake-free units. I think it's $200 or something like that for just a light. But it needs to have that smart technology built in. Otherwise, it won't work.
After the AIMExpo show, you headed across town for the considerably hipper crowd. And here's some images from the One show. So the We Hot Bingo hosted the best show on earth, the One Moto Show. And inside, you got to see some things like this, which is...
Yes, guess what that bike is?
That's not a Chinese motorcycle, is it?
That's a KTM 690 Enduro.
See, KTM's reputation is in such tatters that was this the launch of a new model and they're trying to go incognito? Is that what this is about?
I don't think so. I'm not quite sure what the whole point of this artistic job was, but somebody enjoyed themselves. David Nass Cole, apparently. It was interesting. I mean, it wasn't for me, but hey, if that's your bike and that's how you want to represent yourself, go do it. It's your bike.
There's something interesting in this photograph. Now, obviously, the bike is on some little sort of plinth or something, and hence the stuff under the side stand. But whenever I look at a custom motorcycle, like if you go to the website BikeXif, whenever I see a bike and they've got something wedged under the side stand, to me, it's just like you spent years or thousands of hours building this bike, and you couldn't figure out how to put a kickstand on it that holds it upright. To me, that is just, anyway, I'll get over it. Nice old BMW at the show.
I think that's an ST, which is a pretty rare bike in North America. I'd have to look it up, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. Yeah, that was a beautiful bike. Kind of a resto mod sort of thing, I guess. One of the machines that I would have been more interested in riding there, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's lovely. And this is kind of an interesting thing. This is, I mean, they're sort of called West Coast customs, and they're kind of awkward looking because they always have these high handlebars, and it's a peculiar riding position, isn't it, with the bikini fairing and then these high bars. And
I have a shameful confession. Out of all the bikes I saw at the show, this was my favorite and the one that I wanted to ride the most. Now, I will explain to you the idea behind that club style ergonomic design there.
Yeah, club style. But what's the club? Is it a club that we're invited to, or can we get a membership?
I think you have to pay some really serious dues and wear a patch on your back.
No, I pay my dues, but I will not wear a patch.
The whole idea, I think, is that you have your handlebars up high so you can lane split without getting caught on mirrors. Because if you got caught on mirrors, then you wouldn't be able to put videos on social media of yourself angrily breaking them off later. I would not care to ride with those handlebars, but I thought that bike looked like it might actually be kind of fun to ride.
And don't you think that should be handlebar singular as opposed to handlebars plural? Where do you sit on that?
I could go either way depending how much of a hurry I am writing this story.
I've always thought that you could go either way, Zach. Here we are, a shovel head, which is probably what you think of me right now. Yeah, what do you, any thoughts? Color yellow?
Well, I like yellow bikes. There's a bunch of bikes like this, old iron heads, shovel heads, that sort of junk. If you're going to in my opinion, if you're going to make a chopper, it might as well be old school. And I like seeing those kind of bikes. I wouldn't want to ride one, but it looks cool, I guess.
Well, yeah, I agree. A proper chopper has to be painful. It's got to be a panhead or a shovel head, knucklehead. But what often amazes me is we can make fun of Harley people and custom people. We can make fun of all of us, really. But they will put amazingly huge miles on things like this. You and I might struggle to get across town on it. I know with my back, I probably wouldn't even sit on it. But point being that they will, ride thousands of miles on these things, and, bully for them. For our seventh inning stretch, some words provided by our sponsor. Picture this. You're in the garage, your favorite room in the house, and you're tuning up your engine with parts that you found on eBay. Every piece is just locking perfectly into place. You step back to admire your work, hands covered in grease. And because you're committed to riding that thing further than the odometer can even handle, you start thinking to yourself, you know what? I could also probably use some new brakes, maybe a shock. This baby deserves a new air filter. Don't mind the cat. So you head right back to eBay. You can find any part you need there. It's surreal. From headlights to air filters to exhaust systems, all the way to those carbon fiber rims you've been fantasizing about. eBay is the stocked garage of your dreams. And there's more. You've got eBay Guaranteed Fit, because eBay knows DIY fixes can be major and mods are always incredibly intense. So you need to know those parts are guaranteed to fit every time before you dive in. Wrench first. And on the off chance you order a part and it doesn't fit, send it back. Simple as that. You know what you love more than your bike itself, and of course, that is riding it. You're serious when it comes to engine maintenance and totally locked in when you're headed into a build. And that's exactly why you start with eBay. Minor fix or complete overhaul. You want to get your ride back in the road, and you've got eBay Guaranteed Fit. So eBay, in their large S, created My Garage, where all you have to do is add your ride's info to get the exact parts that fit. When you see the green check, you're a click away from that part clicking perfectly into place. Well, now that you know all of this, imagine standing at the open garage door looking at the bike you love more than anything, knowing that anything is possible, whether it's keeping it on the road forever or turning it into something that's never been on the road before. Because with eBay, your garage just got a whole lot bigger. Get all the parts you need at prices you'll love, guaranteed to fit every time. eBay, things people love. Now back to my conversation with Zac Kurylyk. The Lowdown Show is presented by ADVrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. Well, lucky you, Zachary. You did something else in Vegas, slightly different but motorcycle related. You went to the Mecum. Do we know how to say this? We don't, do we?
We probably should have looked that up, but I always said Mecum. It probably is Mecum, and we look like a bunch of dumb rubes. But what else is new?
Let's call it MECUM, auctions. I'm fairly sure I got the word auctions correct. So I've never been to one of these big auctions. Can you tell me what it's like?
This was my first time as well, and I didn't really know what to expect. If you look at the picture here, you can see the basic idea. Those people down on the floor are the bidders, and the people up in the stands with me are the hoi polloi, the people who are just there to gawk. And you can see in front that stage, they just roll bikes through endlessly. And I mean, it's like a machine. They just one after another, they roll them out. And the guy there in the cowboy hat calls out the auction, and you bid. They start off at some ridiculously high number, and nobody ever goes for it. So if you've seen this stuff on YouTube or TV, you know what to expect. But I was surprised at how easy it was to access and look at the machines that were coming up for bidding. I thought, that would be kind of restricted to registered bidders or whatever. But as you can see, this picture here is from the garage out back. And there was just lines and lines and lines of these vintage bikes. And people were wandering around looking at them and figuring out what they wanted to buy or what they wish they could buy.
And were there one thing that I follow that online site, Bring a Trailer, occasionally, which sells cars and motorcycles. But were there a lot of them that sold, or did some not reach reserve? And as a spectator, were you aware of this or not?
Yeah, it was quite interesting to see how it all worked out. They have this. Some of them didn't reach reserve, and they would go to this other process called, I think, the bid goes on. They'd roll it behind a curtain, and they try to work out a deal between the bidder and the seller. But a lot of them, especially the more expensive ones, had no reserve because they knew that they were going to go for big bucks. And the biggest bucks ever, actually, the most expensive motorcycle ever known to sell at private sale was at this auction. Went for $1.2 million US. Plus buyer's fee that worked out to $1.32 million.
Really?
It was a 1960.
Sorry, I'm interrupting you. Go ahead.
It was the bike that sold for the big bucks was a 1916 V twin, and now the name of the company is
Cyclone.
Yeah. A yellow painted Cyclone V twin. It was very meticulously restored. I did not actually get a picture of that bike because I don't think it was out back with all this stuff. Anyway, it sold the day after I was there.
Well, it wasn't out because guys like you with oily fingers could get near it.
Yeah, that's right. Putting our greasy thumbprints all over it.
Yeah, I mean the early Americans. There's interestingly enough, some of the early American V twin stuff is really beautiful and quite sophisticated. I mean, Indian had a swing arm suspension bike in the teens. So there was, and some of the bikes were, and I don't know what the Cyclone, but some of them were bevel overhead valve and bevel drive overhead valve. I mean, they're really beautiful stuff. And gotta say, American motorcycles in the teens looked like they were really taking off technology wise, but come the 30s, things really stalled. But some of them were really incredibly beautiful.
It was interesting to see what was hot and what was not at this sale. There was a ton of Brit bikes there, and Brit bikes historically have been collector's items and vintage machines that people want. Some of them went for under. I talked to one gentleman who had some really neat stuff there, and his bikes were selling for less than he had paid for them and put into them. And on the other hand, a Z1 900 from, what was the first year for the Z1? Was it 73?
I don't know.
Anyway, they had a Kawasaki Z1 900 that went for, I think it was $31,000. And to me, unless that bike was never ridden, I just can't imagine spending that kind of money on a Z1 900. Even then, they weren't exactly common when I was a kid, but they were certainly lots of them around. And but apparently that's where the money is now, is vintage Japanese machines. And some of those went for what I thought was quite high pricing.
Well, there is an interesting trend that happens in the sale of old vehicles, and it kind of goes like this. There's a story that goes, sort of a way to explain it, which is that, whichever cohort of citizens are of an age to be able to afford it, it's the bikes they wanted when they were kids. And, when you look at certain auction sale results, sometimes you'll see a Triumph Bonneville and a Honda Z50, and they will sell for the same price, or the Z50 will be higher. So old Japanese, or ST90s or CT70 Honda stuff, especially the trail bikes, but going into bigger bikes as well. But stuff that was disposable for years and years, Japanese stuff. 250 enduro Yamahas. I mean, these things will be $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. Whereas the traditional blue chip investments, the BSAs and Triumphs and Nortons and stuff, it's really suppressed because the people who wanted those bikes, guys in their 60s and 70s and beyond, are just aging out of motorcycling, and they're no longer around to buy it. And the only exception, I mean, this ultra rare stuff is kind of, the Bruff Superiors and Crockers and stuff like that is kind of its own thing. And they always seem to, the ultra rare will always be coveted. But the bikes, that were traditionally really coveted are no longer, which is kind of great in a way, because if you want to own one of those things and give it a go, they're not in the stratosphere. After all that time in Las Vegas, Zach, you probably needed to get out. And of course, that's exactly what you did. You got out. And did you get out of town? And you took one of these, and that's a very rocky looking outcrop. That's not New Brunswick. So tell me where you are and what are you riding?
That picture is a CFMOTO 800 Ibex in the Valley of Fire, just north of Las Vegas.
Sorry to jump in, but wouldn't that be great if it was the CFMOTO Ibex Valley of Fire? That would be a great name just right there. And you heard it here first. So tell me about this bike and where did you go, and give me some thoughts on it.
This is basically a KTM 790 Adventure, but with a 19-inch front wheel instead of a 21/18 wheel set. So it's the 790 Adventure that KTM never made. KTM has never made, that I'm aware of, a variant of the 890 or 790 Adventure platforms with a 19-inch front wheel. Well, CFMOTO builds the 790 for KTM in China, and they also make the 800 Ibex for themselves with very similar mechanics and very similar electronics. That's what this bike is. And I had it for roughly a week. I took it from Las Vegas north. I went up through Utah, stayed around the St. George area, went and I saw Zion National Park, did some pretty cold riding north of there in the mountains. And then I took a day and I went from St. George over to Monument Valley and back. That's about a 9-hour return ride. And it was always enjoyable, going to Monument Valley. So I had a good time. That was a cold day. Yeah.
That looks very chilly. So, so how close is it to the KTM? Is it the equal of the KTM?
It's hard to say because KTM doesn't make this exact bike, right, with a 19-inch front wheel. But having said that, if you're riding this machine, you could close your eyes and think you were on a KTM for sure. Most of the electronics are very similar. The engine feels the same. It feels like the suspension is very well sorted. I didn't push it very much off-road. I did some dirt road riding with it, but I didn't have anybody else riding with me. And I had luggage on it a lot of the time. So I didn't want to get into a situation where I got into trouble on, the rear end of Utah somewhere in some back country, dirt hole, and couldn't get myself out. But when I did ride off road, I was actually quite impressed with its capability on gravel and so on. I really liked it.
So I don't really know CFMOTO very well, although there's a dealer in my little town, which is kind of interesting. There's a CFMOTO Yamaha Honda dealer. What is do they feel cheap? I mean, just do they is there anything about them that screams they were made in China, or is that done? Is that finally cheap made in China stuff, at least on the better Chinese stuff, or does that still exist?
This would be one of their premium models, so I can't speak to their smaller bikes. I haven't really ridden any of those, but this bike felt just as good as KTM. It was there was nothing that you sat on it and you thought, that switch looks chintzy, or this looks like junk. It was a very well put together, well made motorcycle.
I mean, one of the things that we've Michael Ullaric joined me on the podcast last week, and it's a really good one. So I encourage people to go back and listen to it if they haven't. We talked about tariffs, and I mean, Chris, one of the big things with Chinese motorcycles at present is that you may have issues with China as a political entity, but when you go into a dealership and you see a nice looking bike that's kind of a KTM for 25% less, then that all of a sudden China's not so bad anymore. Human rights? What human rights? But of course, with these impending tariffs, it looks like everything could potentially go up. And I guess if everything goes up equally, maybe it's still valuable. But all of a sudden, if this bike is $21,000 or something, maybe it'll make us rethink and buy more Harley Davidsons. I guess that's the goal.
It's a tricky situation because at first you might say, well, if the CFMOTO goes up 25% and a European bike doesn't, then CFMOTO's lost its pricing advantage. But if CFMOTO is building that European bike, then the European bike goes up 25% too. And then, of course, Europe is not without, it's not outside the realm of possibility that European motorcycles may get their own, dare I say it, well-deserved tariffs, because Europeans have been tariffing Harley Davidson for a long time. So, I don't really have any comment on any of the stuff as to whether, it's good or bad or whatever to all this tariff situation. But I will say this. I talked to a bunch of people about it at AIMExpo, and the standard response was, we'll see how it all works out. It could be a few months of worrying for nothing. It could be lean times for a few years. Who knows? The last month has been very busy and active in the tariff world, but nothing appears to be set in stone right now.
It raises an interesting point, though, which is if a motorcycle is built in China and comes to America, say tariffs are only affecting China. Let's just take this scenario. But if this, then the CFMOTO IBEX 800 would get a tariff on it. But if the CFMOTO makes the KTM and it goes to Europe and then comes into America and there's no tariff, when it's essentially the same or a very similar motorcycle, that's kind of interesting too, isn't it? So life gets complicated. Okay, what's this bike?
That bike is a Benelli TRK 502X. That is also made in China. Benelli is an Italian company, but they have their bikes made in China. I believe it's the same company makes that bike that makes the Chinese Harley Davidsons that are at the Harley Davidson riding schools. So this machine has about 48 horsepower from a parallel twin engine, has again a 19-inch front wheel, spoked rims, non-adjustable suspension. It's definitely more of a budget-friendly machine than the CFMOTO IBEX that we just saw.
And what you think?
I was pretty impressed with this bike as well. It's definitely not built to go as fast and be ridden as hard, off-road. But nevertheless, for the money, I think $67.99 MSRP in the US. You're getting a pretty nice little motorcycle. I put a lot of miles. I think I put 1,200 miles on this in about 5 days, and highly enjoyed it. Rode it a bit on some desert roads. Rode it on Route 66 into Oatman there on that really twisty road. Did a bunch of Arizona backcountry stuff around close to the border. Really enjoyed it. I would actually be, if I wasn't going to ride off-road, if I was just going to ride in the street, this bike would be enough for me. I did, the last day I had this bike before I went to Las Vegas to return it, I did several hours on the highway, indicated close to 90 miles per hour. So probably closer to, 81, 82 miles per hour, but it handled it just fine. So, what else can you say? It did the job.
Have you ridden Honda's CB500X?
No, I would be very curious to test these side by side. This would be considerably cheaper than the Honda. I don't know how they would stack up. I've ridden the other Honda 500s, the CBR and the R, and they're surprisingly capable for what the price tag. But aside from the Honda, there's not really much like this on the market in North America right now. The KTM 390 is smaller, has a lot less torque. So, this is kind of in a class with this and the Honda 500 and maybe CFMOTO's 450. But again, that's a twin as well. But it's not aimed at the same kind of riding as this. This is sort of like a street bike that looks like a GS. Comes at a low price tag, and over in Europe, these machines sell very, very well. These are one of the top selling adventure bikes in Europe, believe it or not.
And relating back to a podcast that I did with Eva Rupert, who runs with her partner, runs this really charming old motel in Arizona. And you rode there. That's your bike, I presume. So tell me about this place.
That was a super cool stop. It's in the town of Bisbee, Arizona. I really enjoyed staying there. A lot of these old mining towns, they get turned into tourist traps. Tombstone, Arizona is just up the road from Bisbee. And I stopped in there because, if you've watched any movie about the, Wyatt Earp, you have to go to Tombstone. I love that stuff. So
any place named Tombstone, my God, what a great name. Really, I got shot in Tombstone. Well, it serves you right.
Yeah, exactly. You should have known it was coming.
You should have known.
Anyway, I went to Boot Hill and Tombstone. How could you not go to Boot Hill and Tombstone? That's just like the quintessential Wild West experience. But you get there and they got Boot Hill mugs and Boot Hill T-shirts and Boot Hill bumper stickers in the store attached to the graveyard. And it's like that in Oatman as well, which I also visited on this trip. I love going through Oatman, but after a while, all the tourist trap stuff grows old, and especially for me because I grew up in Prince Edward Island, which is of course Canada's ultimate tourist trap. Anyway, you get down to Bisbee, and it's certainly not a tough mining town anymore. It's kind of a hipster oasis in the deserts of Arizona, and it's neat to see a place that didn't just convert itself into selling, made in China coffee mugs to unsuspecting tourists. And Eva and Sterling's motel here is a really nice little spot. I think it was built in the 30s. I had a great time staying there and probably would go back again next time I'm through there.
In closing, words from our sponsor. Picture this, you're halfway through a DIY motorcycle fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. It's okay, because you know whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got simply everything. Brake rotors, lights and tire exhaust systems, whatever you need. And it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you ordered the right thing. All the parts you need at prices you'll love, guaranteed to fit every time. eBay, things people love. Thank you for listening to The Lowdown Show.